So the transfer window's been closed for about a week now and got me thinking, what exactly are these teams paying for and what are they getting back? I've had a look and I can give you 8 insights, including a team that went on a fairy tale journey and one team whose return on investment is not great, to put it nicely. Hi, I'm Wayne and welcome to Goals by the Numbers. Let's get straight into it. So the first step was to look at the transfer spend over the last 5 seasons and look for an insight. Collecting all the data, nothing really stood out as like a major point of contention to discuss. So I then decided to change the perspective and I thought, if I look at the last 5 seasons and collect that data, will they be able to look at a period of time and see who's been the most successful depending on what they have and haven't done with their money? So that brought up some interesting results and then led to the insights. So to make things clear, the constraints will be, or a constraint will be, any competition where two teams have had to win a tournament to qualify to play for a trophy has been discounted. So what that means is the Community Shield not included, the UEFA Super Cup not included, because that's just the Community Shield for teams playing in European competition. The DFL Super Cup also not included, and the Trophy de Champions in France not included. There will be some fans who think those trophies should be included, and I understand those arguments. And my argument to them would be, as a fan, a trophy's great, a win's a win. We never want to shy away from that. But if I was to tell you that your team would spend a 100 million euros or 100 million pounds to win the Community Shield, and that would be the only thing you're going to win for the next 5 seasons, you would not be happy. There would be other trophies that you would rather your team win and spend 100 million on doing so. So we are where we are. Looking at the table, a few things become clear. Chelsea had the highest expenditure and the highest income. They also have a really large amount of players who have come into the club and have left the club. But noticeably, the number's quite similar. It hasn't been 200 coming in and 100 going out. It's been 137 coming in and 135 go out. So at least they're trying to keep the squad of a similar size, and they have only increased it by 2 over the 5 years, which I couldn't actually believe because it seems like they're signing players all the time. But stats are stats, and facts are facts. Manchester United came in second with a really high expenditure. Not as high as Chelsea's, but closer to Manchester City and Paris Saint Germain, two teams who have won much more than they have. So that's already a bit of a red flag. You'll also notice as well that the income Manchester United have from transfers is nearly half of what Manchester City have made, and 192 million euros off what Paris Saint Germain have made. Again, another negative, another red flag. But with this kind of information at hand across 5 years, we can look at a bit of a bigger picture. If then it was a case of confirming how many trophies each team had won, so we could, from a simplistic view, say this is the balance or the net spend, this is the amount of trophies you won, this is how much it cost per trophy. So two teams have been included that haven't won a trophy, those being Nottingham Forest and Brighton. Nottingham Forest are there simply because they've spent quite a large amount. And Brighton Hove Albion also made the list because they've also spent, and sometimes the perception I have is that they don't actually really spend money. But interestingly, they also made profit. So, not a bad thing. So, if we discuss each insight, we come up with the following. Would you believe that once upon a time, Manchester United and their fans didn't even regard Manchester City as actual rivals outside of people actually from Manchester? Well, now how times have changed. So, to compare the net spend of both, Manchester City sit at minus 396 million euros, but that has gained them 6 trophies. On the flip side, Manchester United Well, their net spend is minus 783 million euros, and that's got them two trophies. The gulf in efficiency with the money being spent couldn't be contrasted more clearly than this. One team is spending less money and winning more trophies, including bigger ones, i.e., Champions League, and the other club seems to be in a spiral of quasi perpetual crisis. Tottenham Hotspur, Spurs, as we know them. As long as I can remember, they have not been the perpetual underdog, they've been the perpetual underperformer. In fact, I can remember early 2000s, a match where quotes came out after the game where the halftime team talk for the team losing 3-0 against Spurs was, lads, it's Spurs. And then they promptly scored 5 goals and beat Tottenham 5-3. Spurs have spent 944 million euros. Is this why Daniel Levy's recently been moved on? I don't know. But outside of that, they've only actually won one trophy. So on a cost per trophy basis, you're looking at nearly €1 billion spent to win one trophy, which is not sustainable because most teams just don't make that much money per season. That means that their return on investment is worse than Arsenal, Chelsea, and Manchester United. Can this be improved? We'll have to wait and see. And next we have Liverpool, current champions in the Premier League, who spent just over 482 million euros in the transfer window that's just closed. If we look at them over the time period, Liverpool spent 932 million euros, but they've also recouped 439 million euros whilst winning 4 trophies. Now, this seemed a much more balanced approach than a lot of teams on this list and puts them in a really good company with PSG and Manchester City, who have won the most, and between the two of them, have won more titles than the rest of the group. In fact, Liverpool is propping up most of the rest of the group. We will have to see how Liverpool get on and if this current increase in spend continues. But considering over the last few seasons, their spend has been relatively low. Their PSR must be in a great standing. And maybe next year we'll get another bit of a splash of cash. And then we'll see what happens from there. But I should add as well, the net spend was only 263 million euros. So even though a large amount went out in the transfer window just gone, player sales actually brought that right back down to a much more palatable level, at least for non-Liverpool fans. Manchester City, a club that is not afraid to actually spend money to acquire players. But what should be noted is the fact that after the club was bought recently, when the last ownership came in, money was spent, and then there became a turning phase where they started to spend less and less on players and started to acquire them younger and younger to at least have a resale value and plan for the future. We are now at the stage where Manchester City have spent 396 million euros net spend, but also won 6 trophies, and that works out to only 66 million per trophy. Now, to put that in comparison, if we think of a player like Declan Rice, he went to Arsenal for what, 105 million pounds? Add a bit on for euros, let's call it 110. That's two Declan Rices nearly for a trophy that Manchester City are winning. If that's not efficiency, I really don't know what is. And when you think domestically, only Liverpool, who are spending less but having a very balanced approach, are the only team who really come close. So, with a more international angle, we have RB Leipzig, a team that was recently purchased by the RB Group. And by recently, what is it, 8, 9, 10 years now. They were picked up in the fourth tier of German football. Investment and funds were put into the club to get them into the Bundesliga. Once in the Bundesliga, it was then a case of spending a bit more money to get the team up to the required level to qualify for Europe and then to make them self-sustainable, which always was the plan for Red Bull. Now Red Bull are at a stage where over the period, they have actually made a profit of 64.4 million euros and still managed to win 2 trophies, domestic cups in Germany. When looking at the Premier League, the only team that we can really compare that with in our table is Brighton, who also made a profit, but their profit was only just under 3 million euros and they didn't win any trophies. In fact, Brighton's model is to acquire players for relatively small fees, give them exposure to the first team, develop them to then sell them on to bigger teams for higher fees. So a really good example of that would be, well, there's 2 examples. One being Alexis McAllister, who went from Brighton to Liverpool, but that was for 30 million, and that was due to a release clause in his contract at Brighton. The other example would be Moises Caicedo, who I believe was only acquired for or bought for £5 million and then sold to Chelsea for something like 115 million euros, pounds. So when you think of that kind of turnaround, Brighton can buy 4 or 5 players for that 100 million, so 20 million each. If 2 of them pay off and then can be sold on for 150, the whole cycle just starts again. And then you still have 3 other assets who may be good players, haven't increased in value, but can still be used for the first team and the club. So Chelsea, post the Roman Abramovich era and fronted by Topoli, Chelsea have spent the most money in euros and have also made the most money in euros. Chelsea have a net spend of minus 743 million euros, but they only won two trophies in that time period. Fair enough, to be fair, one of them being the Club World Cup, which was a couple of months ago in the summer. But they've also outspent Bayern Munich by a factor of 3 and also won less trophies. So the argument has to be made, are Chelsea taking the right approach, spending this much money? And, we look at the club and we can joke. The first team squad has about maybe 50 players. I've never seen such a large turnaround in players being bought in and moved on as with Chelsea. It sometimes feels like it's a league in itself, with the amount of players coming and going. I can't keep track of it. But, money has been spent, trophies have been won. Yes, it's 3 times more than buying and spending. Bayern are in a weaker league. However, is the approach by Chelsea sustainable? We're going to have to wait and see. I don't think we've seen the full fallout from when Chelsea started spending money and giving players 8-year contracts so they could amortize the purchase of the player over 8 years as opposed to the usual 5, which most teams have been doing. So keep things exciting for us, please, Chelsea. Always love to see who you're buying and who you're selling. Garnacho joined recently. Kenda from Sporting should be joining next year. There now seems to be an absolute complement of wingers. Mudryk, he's currently banned. So let's see how it goes for Chelsea this season. West Ham they've spent 704 million euros. But what's that got them? That got them to the final of the Europa Conference League, which they won. I never thought in my years I would actually see West Ham win a European trophy, not because they're not capable, anybody can win with a sequence of good results and or good players. But with all the other teams in the competition and I believe they beat Fiorentina in the final. West Ham aren't a team who are regularly in Europe, which can sometimes lead one to believe that players with less experience playing in Europe might struggle because they're just not used to the European game, the different pace of the matches, the different teams, and where they play tactically. So it could have been a bit of a nightmare strategically. But the reason this is an interesting one and a bit of a fairy tale is because of the fans. Yes, a lot of money was spent. It's more than say Brighton, but the point is that night will live in the memory of West Ham fans for such a long time that they would probably have a whip around and pay the money back if they could, just for that one memory. In fact, I can remember Manchester United winning the Champions League in 1999. We could have spent 4 billion to get to that final and win it. And if they said, we need people to put their hand up and donate £100 to pay off that debt, I mean, yeah, I put my hand up because it was such a great memory, even though it was like a one-off moment. But yeah, sometimes the memories are priceless. And on to Manchester United, a team that were bought by the Glazers and now have a minority shareholder in Ineos and also Jim Radcliffe, who run day-to-day operations. The club is now saddled with debt, but the club is still spending money. So Manchester United are in a situation where they are trying to spend their way out of trouble and win to increase income to then pay off debt and spend more money. The problem is when you have teams like Liverpool around who are very, very financially prudent while still having success, and then Manchester City who are spending more but having a little bit more success than Liverpool, which I think that actually might stop pretty soon. You then have Manchester United who are competing with two teams, and Arsenal who are also strong contenders. Then there's Chelsea, and then you have to wonder all this money's being spent, and what exactly is the return? Well, 390 million euros per trophy won. Yes, that's more trophies than some clubs on the list have won. And the last 5 years would not and could not be described as very good for Manchester United, but 391 million euros per trophy. So one trophy for that amount. That is not sustainable, especially when you think that Manchester City, who are winning more trophies and spending similar-ish amounts of money, have won 6. And for them, it's 66 million euros per trophy, 391. You can't keep outspending Manchester City by, was it 4 times, and expect to keep up. It's just not going to work. So, 8 insights from looking at the amount spent in the transfer window over the last few seasons. So what do we think? Are the values just going to continue to go up over time? Is there going to be a crash where prices will kind of collapse upon themselves because debts will be too high or a TV deal will get pulled? The Germans in the Bundesliga seem really dead set against spending the same amounts of money that we see in the Premier League because they want to be financially prudent and kind of get players in and develop their own success. But is that going to result in them being left behind in the long term? Red Bull Leipzig did come in with the intent of we're going to spend money, but even they kind of tempered that reasonably quickly. So, questions, comments, feedback, concerns. What do we think? Is the January transfer window going to be much different? Or is it going to be a bit of a quiet affair? I'll catch you in the next video.